Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to House of Footy. It's your boy Ray, and alongside me is Mac.
Good evening.
Gio won't be joining us today, unfortunately, but don't worry, we are going to be reviewing the match day 24 of the Premier League games. Before we get into it, don't forget to follow us on our social media, both on Twitter and Instagram. Our handle is at House of underscore Footy. Also, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to us. We are on both Spotify and YouTube. And lastly, if you're free to get in touch with us via email, we love hearing from you guys and we want you guys getting involved. Our email is houseoffooty@hotmail.com. All right, so let's go straight into it, Mac. The title race, big one. Obviously, Arsenal were away to Aston Villa this weekend. And in short, it was, I think, a game of two halves. Aston Villa coming out strong in the first half, going actually into the halftime with a 2-1 lead. But Arsenal came back and really showed why they deserve to be in this title race. What was your take on it?
Overall, I thought that this was an enthralling game. If you're a neutral, you probably thought that it really had a bit of everything in terms of hard tackles, a lot of mistakes, to be completely honest, a lot of good chances, some moments of real quality of play from both teams. So overall, like I said, as a neutral, you probably were absolutely enthralled. Overall, if you're maybe an individual fan of either of these teams, it's probably not great for your heart or maybe your mental health or just kind of how you're living day to day. But that, though, in terms of, though, on the bright side, if you are an Arsenal fan, as I am positioned to be, kind of having a last minute winner like that, there's no better feeling than that. Is there not? So overall, very, very happy. This game, I guess, to be able to put it in summation, I personally feel like Arsenal in a lot of ways were in control in terms of their key aspects. Because if you look at kind of the stat sheet in terms of what they generally do, a lot of possession, a lot of shots, but they weren't clinical in those moments. And it's something that we've talked about where kind of winners want to be able to make sure title winners take their chances and you will regret not to do so. And it looked like for a large portion of the game, Arsenal were going to be in a very similar position. But luckily they managed to squeeze something out. Very unfortunate. Jorginho, probably his first big moment as an Arsenal player thus far, which just makes me want to vomit as I'm saying it. But that own goal for Martinez, he has that Arsenal jersey on underneath, full of respects. We'll take it. But overall, a very exciting game. And even though Aston Villa ended up losing this game, I would say from on their side, they can at least still be proud with the effort that they've put in. And there does seem to be a lot of progression from that team under Unai Emery.
Yeah, interesting you note, obviously, teams taking their chances, a theme that we'll talk about in the next game as well. But yeah, Aston Villa started well. Just to go back to the very start, as we predicted, Mac, yourself, and Gio, Trossard did start in the place of Martinelli, and importantly, Coutinho did start for Aston Villa for it seems like a run of games where he hasn't really started. It's more so he's come off the bench, which he did play a crucial role in one of the goals. But taking it back to the first goal for Aston Villa, the ball over the top, and Watkins being one-on-one against Saliba, getting the best of him for that chance. It looked like it was going to be one of those days for Arsenal. And might I say, it would have been a bad evening for Arsenal if it continued that way. Gotta give it props to Saka's goal as well, though. The way he took his finish looks really, really good. And then, again, that well-worked third goal in the game, and second goal for Aston Villa down the left-hand side with the aforementioned Coutinho. Bright spots there for Emery. The link-up play and sort of the ideas are flowing and are going to be good. It's just, and he said it in his post-match conference, he's very disappointed in the result, and Ollie Watkins, I think, echoed that response because you're 2-1 at home leading against, granted, the league leaders at the moment. You still want to be able to come and see that result. But on the flip side, Mac, can you walk us through some of the changes? And it looked like the individual performances that were raised in the second half from Arsenal.
It's really strange to say. I would say probably the main driving force. Saka, of course, had a phenomenal goal, was troubled down that right-hand side for Arsenal the entire game, and really asked Aston Villa a lot of questions. But as the game grew in, Odegaard grew a lot more into the game and orchestrating the play, connecting a lot of passes, even though he absolutely missed a sitter in the 76th minute. After Zinchenko went on to be able to tie the game off a corner kick, kind of his first goal in the Premier League, which is strange to be able to think of. I thought he may have scored one for one at City Point, and his response to it was kind of like, no. Right. There was no celebration. It's 2-2. We're still here to win the game. So that's definitely a winner's mentality there. And normally you would think that scoring your first goal, you'd be overexcited. But back to Odegaard is that even though he missed the chance, like I said, it seemed like he was the one kind of dictating play, be able to control the tempo of the game, was able to link a lot of passes into the Nketiahs, into the Sakas to create more opportunities for Arsenal. And overall, his play I think is very, very important because if he's able to find that space, more so on the right hand side in between kind of the defenders, the midfielders, and find those pockets of areas, he has the quality to put a fine through a through pass to either or any attacking player, as well as be able to take on the opportunity himself. So he's shown through goals, through assists, that he's really able to do what he needs to do. But it's very important that because a lot of times in the first half, the reason why I personally feel like he didn't play as well is because he wasn't put in the position to receive those balls in that area. And that was due to a lot of the time the pressure of the Arsenal defenders and midfielders. Even though Jorginho did go on to end up having a great impact, but overall, I feel like in the first half, he was out of position quite a few too many times and not as aggressive as maybe you would get from someone like Partey. Ben White, Saliba both made some crucial mistakes lead up to some of those Arsenal conceding those chances and those goals. But generally speaking, throughout the season, if they would have been better, it gives more opportunity for players Odegaard to have a larger input on a game, which as Arsenal other players grew the game, it just made Odegaard more and more essential and more visible that the type of influence he can have. So overall, I think that's really what changed is their mentality of we're going to step up, we're going to press up, we're going to apply a lot more pressure. And as soon as we get the ball back, we're going to feed it directly into kind of our more dangerous players and allow them to create.
Yeah, exactly right. Big credit to Odegaard. He steps up, and even though he did miss that chance, it's still, the ball over to Nketiah, where he's through 1-on-1, and him just having a hand in everything. And it shows because even in the City game where Arsenal scored first, he's the guy who's always trying to get his team back up and getting ready to go again. Because obviously, and we've seen this from Arsenal throughout the season, even when they concede. It's actually when they concede where they start playing even better because of, I guess, of that pressure, and a huge props has to go to Odegaard for his sort of mentality and his ability to continue to push even if the results haven't been there. And he's, I think, a big reason for sort of where they went to into this game. And again, we're going to talk about a little bit about that goal from Jorginho. Personally, it was a great goal. Personally, for Martinez, I don't feel as bad for him because obviously he would have liked to get the win against Arsenal, but the way he conceded that goal, a little bit harsh, a little bit on the mouth for him, and he's been really vocal about certain things, and it really shows, I think, for him that he's still in Premier League. There's still things to be worked on, and the mentions of him going to a Champions League club, I thought were a little bit too quick. And it goes to show as well in the 97th minute winner, 97th minute fourth goal for Arsenal, where apparently in the post-match conference, when Emery mentions that he didn't mean for Emi Martinez to go up for the header for that cross, and obviously they go on to concede, and it shows that sometimes the emotions that he may have, Martinez, may be to his detriment. But all credits to Arsenal. How do we feel about this win, Matt? Because it feels like it's more than just the 3 points off the back of that result against City. Going playing first and going back to the top of the table, it obviously means much more than 3 points. What do you think?
Absolutely. I think that's the key point here is because it's of course unfortunate to be able to lose against Manchester City if you're an Arsenal fan and want to be in the position where at least maybe coming out of a tie with that. But the way that they're able to immediately respond, a lot of like Thierry Henry, other Arsenal legends were like, it's not, yes, you can't really kind of control that game anymore. All you can kind of control is how you respond because theoretically the title's still within your hands if you win out, right? Still a long way to go, but you're still in kind of in control of your own destiny there. So it's great to see the response in the manner that they did, and were able to come back, just not being down both times to come back to tie the game and then have the extra oomph to be able to come in and to be able to win the game. Full credit to them. The concerning part now is Arsenal have conceded the opening goal in 4 of the last 5 Premier League games for them, which is one more than they did in the first 18 games of the Premier League season. So that's a worrying trend. It's great to see that they have the capacity and the ability to come back and respond in a game like this. But what made them very successful at the beginning of the season was applying pressure in the first 10 to 15 minutes, getting that early goal, and coming away with the lead and forcing the opposition to more open up, right? Which allows them to get more space. So even though, yes, it's a lot more than the 3 points, it's great for them to be able to see that progression. There are still some signs where, you know what, hey, we got the win, that's great, but there are things we need to improve here. So overall, it depends on how you look at it, and Arteta can come away from this game as like, we have some great positives here, but here are the things that we really need to work on if we're going to continue week in, week out to perform at a high level, in which we need to be able to do to make sure that we stay competitive till the end of the season.
Yeah, and obviously we'll have to see how that plays out and how they sort of take this win and hopefully continue on that run of form where, yeah, going back to the beginning of the season, they would just take teams apart by storm in the beginning and then at the end just finish the games. But let's move on now to their, I guess, title rivals. Manchester City were away at Nottingham Forest. 1-1 was the final result, which honestly to me was a little bit surprising. City were obviously the team with more possession, more chances. It was interesting. Phil Foden did start for this game after a brief spell away from the team. And they had chances. He obviously one of the chances that were created by him. He was part of that, and then Bernardo Silva, I think, very very much the goal that he scores, very very much a constant pressure and just a result of that constant pressure that City had on that Nottingham Forest team. But chances weren't put away in the second half as well, Mac. And Nottingham Forest were able to come back. What type of result? What do you think this result means for City in the long run?
For City, it leaves me with some questions because if I were to take a step back and look at how they've played, the Bernardo Silva, because there's a lot of talk of the false nine these last couple of years, like a false left back position in a lot of ways, where defensively that's where he plays. It leaves them in a lot of trouble because if you break down the goal that Chris Wood ends up scoring for Nottingham Forest to tie up the game in the 84th minute, you can directly pinpoint it at Bernardo Silva. He's a great player, but he's not a left back because in that position he goes to be able to press the ball when the non-Forest players are breaking down their right hand side, and takes himself completely out of the game by overpressing on a 1-2, which normally as a midfielder you want to be able to make sure you get up and apply that pressure, but as a defender it's a different set of mentality where they're able to 1-2 right around him, take him out of the game, and it's a domino effect from there where Laporte ends up being out of position. Ruben Diaz has to be able to shit it over, and Kyle Walker has an extra man that he doesn't kind of turns his shoulder last second, doesn't realize Wood's coming around the corner. So overall, that's the real question for me is that yes, you have the positives where in possession it's phenomenal. You can do so many different things creative wise. Bernardo Silva ends up scoring, but defensively, are you leaving yourself too short with? Normally, when you're playing three at the back like this, at least in an attacking sense, you have fullbacks to be able to cover and to be able to come back. But you don't have that extra coverage here. So theoretically, if you're playing against an attacking front four, which some teams on a break may end up being that way, you're going to be a man down or even in even numbers for City, which is not the easiest way and most consistent way to make sure that you're keeping clean sheets. So that for City is their big overarching question I do have. On a very micro level though, even though yes, you could look at that, that's not great. They've dropped points again. There are massively huge chances missed by a whole host of players. Foden, there was a 2-0 at one point between him and Haaland. Made the wrong decision. Haaland missed a couple chances in the last second. Hit the post for one of them. Came back. Missed the rebound. Rodri, I think he missed a header very early on, just in front of the penalty shot marker. And Laporte hits Keylor Navas, the cojones. And if anybody hits it either side, it's a goal. So you could look at this and be like, oh, there's a flaw in how they're playing, and I think that's contributing to why they're conceding. But on the other side, there was a massive host of chances that you could look at the other side and be like, they could have easily scored 3 or 4 or 5 goals in this game, right? So it's tough to pull out and from what you really want. But based on the result, they might be interested in looking at playing a little bit more of a conventional system because this does leave them at least with one area you could potentially continuously expose.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously Cancelo is out on loan for the rest of the season. The only real left back you could really say would be Ake, who has started there in several games, but he, again, not a traditional left back. So rotation that Pep always has for his team will leave us with questions throughout. And you said it again, missed chances. City, I think typically they would have in their mind they're already winning 3-0. By the time it's the 80th minute, lack of concentration, like you just said, and two passes basically from the Nottingham Forest defenders through to the player on the right. I can't remember who it was. Takes out essentially six players because it's basically a 5v4 in the end. And obviously credit to Nottingham Forest for working that well because they still had to obviously move it past and maneuver it around that defense. But it's a constant theme against the City team this season. The defense hasn't been as solid as before, and similar to Arsenal, I guess. When the only thing that comes to mind right now is when City played Spurs, conceded two right at the end of the first half, and had the chance to play out the remainder of the game, being down and sort of with something to chase. Whereas right now, City are a little bit in between. They're not obviously if they put away the chances, it's a different game, but still, it feels like they kind of haven't really meshed properly. Where if they score, they haven't really done as well for controlling the game and essentially finishing the game. So I guess we'll have to see how that plays out for the rest of the season. What do you think, though, this means for City? Because obviously they have a Champions League game coming in midweek against RB Leipzig. Do you see a whole lot of changes for this upcoming match, or what do you expect?
I absolutely do. I know that they're facing Bournemouth next week, so they might see that as potentially kind of a free hit where they're facing a team in the relegation battle. They might be able to kind of storm away and be able to get 3 points there. So I do see it probably a host of changes where Pep generally, most recently, he has kept the majority of his starting lineup the same, and really hasn't utilized a whole lot of substitutions, which has been a little bit concerning in some aspects. But I wouldn't be surprised if we maybe see Mahrez come back in for a game, put Ake back into the starting lineup. I wouldn't be surprised if they make a small change like that. But overall, I think they're going to kind of ride with their core of 15, 16 players that they've been running with. I would be very interested to see, and this is a name that hasn't kind of come up recently, is the role of Sergio Gomez, because he is a traditional fullback on the left-hand side that at the beginning of the season was getting some run, but we haven't seen a whole lot from him recently. He does play as more of a traditional kind of wide fullback position with an overlap. I feel like that might be an interesting option, but it'll be if he does play him, then does that kind of change completely how they play away from playing more of the inverted fullback, or has he adjusted enough given his time at City to maybe feel more comfortable in that spot? That's kind of what I'm interested to see if they make a change in something like that. But overall, I think what's more concerning for City, I guess, big picture wise for me in regards to them in the title race is that, and I think this factors a lot of the conversation because I think there's going to be so many kind of twists and turns where each week we're going to be able to touch base, be like, oh, who's the favorite now? Who's going to be here? Because this title race isn't like has been the last couple of years where the Liverpools, the Man Cities, through the entire season have been near perfect. And you have to have that standard. So early on, you can tell who's going to win because that team didn't start out as perfect. There's no team like that. I don't think either of these teams right now are close to that level. I think they could potentially get to that level if they keep improving, but they still have a lot to do to be able to get there. Whereas I feel like for the rest of the season, there's going to be a lot of twists and turns. So even though, yes, right now, just like last weekend, it was all hip hip hooray for City and all doom and gloom for Arsenal, and we can look at the reverse today. I feel like week in, week out, we have potential for kind of twists and turns like that. So overall, I think that they're still in with a fair shout. Them and Arsenal, probably, again, in all likelihood, will be one of those two that will win the title this year. But I feel like City still have a couple changes that they could make where they change their play style, where they may be a little bit more successful. And it'll be interesting to see if they do make those changes.
Yeah, 11 away goals at this point in the season for City, matching the last season's total, which is not great, but as you said, it's going to be a fascinating rest of the season for these two teams battling it out. So on this point, Mac, let's take a quick break, and then we'll be back touching on the chasing pack and how they did this weekend. Welcome back to House of Footy, guys. We're going to continue our match day 24 review with the chasing pack for the top four. Well, I guess with the next team that we'll talk about, Man U 3, Leicester 0. Man U are not really in the chasing pack for the top four, as they are two, I guess, 3 points away from City. If I'm reading it correctly, Mac, am I right?
Unfortunately, yes.
So, are the question you posted here: Are we being disrespectful to Man United, as their position right now? Should they be considered in the title race discussion? Unfortunately, I'm gonna end things quickly here. I don't think so. They've done fantastically well this far in the season to be where they are right now, but there's a lot of games coming, and it's going to be a tough run of games for sure with the sort of the opposition that they're facing, the competitions that they're involved in. If things change, I'll be more than glad to take back my words. But personally, I don't see it right now. Though they did play a great game against this lesser team overall because of the result that they've received. What do you think, Mac?
So I could see why. For one, if and I would like to kind of just I would agree with Aaron Ten Hag's message in regards to this because he was asked after the game, "Are you in a title race right now?" He's like, "Nope, we're focused in regards to just kind of being better because we still have a lot of things we need to improve on." That's a great answer in terms to be able to get the conversation, not pressuring us players, and realize that there's a whole lot of things they need to improve because just as things have gone very, very well for them, there are potentially quick ways for it to turn back the other side. But overall, realistically, to be completely honest, based off the pure numbers, yeah, they are. They very well should be because they're only 6 points out, 5 points out from the top, right? So it's not without reason that if they continue this run of form, that they could potentially be close to the end, if not the title winner at the end of the season. The tough part is that they still have so many more questions than the two teams above them, and we already have enough questions about Arsenal and Man City as it is. In a lot, this kind of Leicester game that they played and they won 3-0 is a microcosm of it because for the first 30, 45 minutes, they looked like the worst team between the two. There was no wit in terms of the team. They weren't attacking very well, losing possession in the middle and being countered very, very quickly and very ruthlessly by Leicester. If it wasn't for David De Gea, they're down on that game 2-0 within the first 30 minutes, and it's shut up shop for them for the rest of the game, and in all likelihood, at least come out with a draw, if not more likely a win for Leicester. So there's so many more questions for this Man U team, and it'll be interesting to see, and I guess I'm curious to see what you think in regards to Rashford, because if anyone to say who's been the talisman for what's been going on for Manchester United and their surge in form, especially since after the World Cup, is this more so, I guess, a new level, and this is the player he's going to be for the rest of his career? Maybe not to this heavy of a degree, but maybe majority of it, or is this just a good run of form for him? Do you see kind of a fundamental change in him as a player that he is now that he wasn't a year ago?
Yeah, I mean, obviously he has been the main point of reference for what Man U have been doing. The ability for him to run in behind and really single-handedly at times bring them back into games or win them games is really impressive. For his sake, I hope he continues this run of form, but still, like you said, there's a lot of questions that this Man U team have to still figure out. The start wasn't the greatest, especially at home. Again, there were a couple of I think changes to that team with obviously the next game that they play against Barcelona for the Europa League into the knockout stages. You know, they still have players to come back from injury. You have your Antonys, your Martial, Ericsson. So, hey, this is great for what they've done so far, and it's with the players that they have, the results that they're getting. It's great. My only concern, and we talked about this, is should the goals dry up if, for example, there's a small injury here or there for key players such as Bruno Fernandes and Marcus Rashford, who have been great for the team so far. Where else would the goals come from? I don't know exactly the number of goals that they have been involved with so far this season or in the last couple of games, but it seems like it's a lot. Sancho did get involved in a goal, which I mean, this was really impressive build up for Man U, and I think that's what Ten Hag would want to sort of his team evolve into. But there are questions. You have Wan-Bissaka and Dallo sort of battling it out for that position. I don't think they are at sort of their peak potential as of yet, and so those questions around those players and sort of the what they're going to do with that back two. Is it going to be Varane and Martinez going forward? What's going to happen with Lindelof and Maguire? Still some questions there. And granted, De Gea had a great game in terms of keeping Man United in the game. Still, the long term, I think there's going to be looking at that position to reinforce. So I want to see how far Man U can go with this run of form and hopefully try to challenge. But personally, I don't think they are at that level yet. But yeah, credit to them. Great result again. And sobering to hear from Eric Ten Hag that this is sort of what they want to build on and not really putting themselves in that title discussion because obviously that will bring more pressure onto you. And so we'll see how that goes for them.
No, I see what you're saying a lot. They have so many questions in regards to them as a team, but the good part is you can see progression for the type of the ways that they want to play, and I think this is clearly, without a doubt, the best run in regards to a management perspective the team has had, and I think that's been a drastic difference, and makes me believe that, like my question I was asking in regards to Rashford, this potentially could be the player he is. Because this is the first time where you see a manager being able to make changes and, depending on how the other team is playing, make smart tactical adjustments to potentially bring out the best of him. As an example, initially in this game, he started out wide. And a lot of the time he started out centrally, my apologies. He started out centrally in a lot of positions, trying to latch onto balls, but there wasn't enough width. So he was able to adjust him to be able to move out wide, stretch the play even further to make sure that we could further isolate him one-on-one and see if we can create more opportunities there. Versus a lot of times it would have kind of just been switching chairs on the Titanic in a lot of ways for previous managers before, where they're like, oh, I don't know what's going on. Versus Ten Hag, it's like, hey, we have the A plan. If A plan is not going to work, there's a B plan. And if that's not going to work, at halftime, I'll yell at you and figure out a C plan, right? So it's always been a kind of a change, and potentially he's now put him in a position where the best of his talents can be utilized. I think it's fair to say, though, that in regards to if like you said, the goals dry up, outside of so Rashford has 24 goals a season. Next closest is Bruno Fernandes with 7. So it really is kind of a one-man army really there in terms of the goal scoring up kind of output. And the good part about this, it does give other players like you mentioned, the Jadon Sanchos, the Antony's time to kind of build back into form and try to bring the best out of them. But if there's even a drop whatsoever from Rashford, they'll be struggling to see. It'll be interesting to see how they score. I think, though, Rashford has now potentially cemented himself as kind of what we may have thought of Son prior to this year, these last couple of years, that level of play.
Right, yeah.
So it's full credit to him, and hopefully he's able to keep going because it is a joy to see. He's playing phenomenal football right now.
Yeah, Man U, again, prove me wrong. I would love to be proved wrong, but that's just my take. Great run of form, though, and I'll be very interested in their next upcoming games. Europa League playoff against Barca, and obviously the EFL Cup final against Newcastle this weekend. So let's leave that at that. We'll touch on it more in our next podcast. But Spurs, West Ham also played this weekend, Max. Spurs winning 2-0 at home. Would it be convincing? I saw the chances that they've had. Granted, they did have more chances. They did create more with sort of what they have in terms of quality against a West Ham team who still I don't think have found their identity. But that first goal, I just have to point it out again. Højbjerg to Davies to Emerson finding himself as the furthest man forward in the middle of the pitch, finishing it. Great finish for him and great goal overall. But again, didn't expect that, and so I don't know. I just thought this game was a poor game for West Ham and a decent game for Tottenham, which they need to pick up points as much as needed, right? What do you think, Mac?
Absolutely. I definitely see where you're coming from, where Tottenham weren't convincing. Overall, you wouldn't say that this was a classic game, a 2-0 Derby win where they controlled a lot of the game, a lot of the tempo. It seemed like West Ham didn't really have anything to provide to the game. So really up to Spurs to see, can they get something? And they did, of course, in definitely an unusual or a surprising fashion in regards to their first goal. The second goal was as least surprising as it could possibly be. Kane to Son match up, right? So that you want to be able to give them credit. It's great to see Son get on the score sheet, Kane to be able to provide, and Tottenham to be able to win without Kane having to provide all the goals. So there's positives there. It'll be interesting to see, though, in regards to a creative sense, what they can really do. This matchup, I feel like, in some ways, was more about how West Ham didn't come out to play versus Spurs came out to win. And we've been getting a lot of helter-skelter where it was great 1 week, poor 1 week for Spurs, which is now they're facing in this next week. I know I'm skipping ahead forward here, but the next week matchup is against Chelsea. And I hate to spoil, but we're going to be talking about Chelsea later. They might be as down bad as they've ever been for me since I've started watching football. So it'll be interesting to see if they can pull up back-to-back wins and further cement themselves in potentially being in a top 4 position. But overall, Spurs have to be happy with the 2-0 win. I guess for you, do you feel like this, now that they are in the top 4, spoiler in regards to Newcastle, of course, losing and moving themselves out, do you see themselves as more of a favorite to finish the top 4 over Newcastle right now, if you were to pick between the two of them?
Ooh, it's tough because you don't really know what type of Spurs team you're gonna get. Consistently, Newcastle have been great defensively, though they did lose this weekend, and so they have a better platform, I think. It's just Spurs, again, granted, the manager came in and made some changes, brought in Richarlison and Danjuma. Now you can afford to have Son sitting, at least for the first part of the game, coming on to score. That is a luxury to have, but I'm definitely, it's going to be him and Kane who are going to be relied upon to continue their run of form and hopefully get them to the top 4. I have more questions for Spurs because, again, now we're going to talk about Liverpool, Newcastle. This was a one-off for Newcastle, I think. Liverpool winning 2-0 away at Newcastle. The goals that they conceded, mistakes here, and obviously the red card. Just not something that I would have expected from Newcastle, as they've been really solid this season. Goals, hard to come by at the moment, but I think they can figure it out. And I would be more so worried about the Spurs' consistency, whereas I think Newcastle are more firm favorites. What do you think, Matt?
I think that's fair because so if we're going to move over in regards to the Newcastle game, this seems like a one-off in a lot of ways in regards to how Newcastle ended up losing this game. One being, of course, if you isolate 2 individual mistakes, one being on the first goal for Liverpool scoring, Darwin Núñez from a chip over the top from Trent, phenomenal ball, good finish. Still scares me whenever he's about to strike the ball, Núñez. I feel like he's going to kill somebody, hit the moon, or he may get the finish. But that's generally my third. If I were to pick the rankings of what I think will likely happen, that's number 3. Overall, though, you can isolate where Trippier is so concerned in regards to the positioning of Andy Robertson, where he stretches out, which pulls the Newcastle defense and spreads them apart quite a bit, where it gives that space for Núñez. And even the second goal, of course, Pope, who's been arguably the best goalkeeper in the Premier League thus far this season, where he just has an error of judgment. Instead of kind of taking a step back and maybe clearing the ball or even just allowing the ball to be played, he tries to clear it with a diving header, which I think is probably the most difficult out of those options to do. And then misplays it. And of course, in the panic, in kind of the fear of that mistake, see Salah running on and just kind of coddles the ball, which gives him the straight red, which again, it's tough where you can look at those errors like that of reasons why they've lost the game. They're just one-offs, blips from what for the rest of the season, we've seen a very successful team. The question really for me between the two teams is that do I trust Newcastle to finally start scoring, or do I trust Spurs to find some level of consistency? To be honest, I don't think it's that much difference between the two of them if I'm isolating those two individual questions, because Newcastle have only scored thus far this season 35 goals. That's one fewer than Leicester, who are 14th. Right. So yes, defensively, that's the reason why they are where they are, but they need to figure out answers there, just as Spurs need to figure out how can we at least put out a consistent result, great, but performance to be able to make sure that those results end up coming. So I to be honest, I lean slightly towards more Spurs because at the very least I know that they'll score enough goals, and I don't know if enough ties are enough for Newcastle to finish in the top 4. But it's very, very close. It's very close between the two, to be honest.
Close for sure. For the Spurs side, obviously you have the expectation. They are expected with the additions that they had, the quality of players that they have to finish in and around that top four position. Whereas Newcastle, if they don't finish in the top four, it's not the end of the world. I would say they obviously would have wanted European competition, which they most likely will get this season. At the end of the season, sorry. And with that sort of level of scrutiny for them compared to Spurs week in week out, if they don't get results, I think they'll be a little more relaxed, and that would enable them to play much more to the level that they can perform upwards. Whereas Spurs, we know what they're capable of, but they've just been so inconsistent. I think so far. Liverpool did get the win though, Mac. They are 2 wins away from fourth, if I'm not mistaken, and so that is well, actually 2 points away from Newcastle, who are in fifth. Sorry, 2 wins away from Newcastle, who are in fifth, and that makes it a little more interesting with Fulham, Brighton still in the sixth and seventh position. Still, I think a long season to play, a lot of games to play, and so keeping an eye on that. What would you give Liverpool chances for making it to the top four?
It's a little rough because they still do have the Champions League. They're playing from our time of recording in the day that this is going to be released. They're facing Real Madrid, which is a tough matchup. It'll be interesting to see if they do end up exiting the Champions League. I think that might have more so a benefit to them in the Premier League as they're starting to get bodies back. Van Dijk was playing. A couple of other players are soon to be back. I think Luis Diaz. I think he's supposed to return fairly soon. Is he not? Was he?
He's training, I believe.
He's training. Yes, I saw that report. So overall, I think that might be a benefit to them in some ways, where if they kind of can shorten their fixture list, kind of have some key players coming back, maybe it's closer. The interesting part is they have a couple of teams to be able to jump. They're not your traditional opponents, being the Chelseas as an example, but it's the Fulhams, the Brightons, who in their own right have had very, very successful seasons. And there are enough questions in regards to the Tottenhams, the Newcastles, theoretically, where you could see the position where Liverpool can close that gap. I think we're a little bit too soon. I think if you ask me 2 weeks from now, they pick up back-to-back wins against Crystal Palace and Manchester United. I feel like that at that point, if that were to take place, yes, absolutely. I think it's still a little bit too soon to say that they might be. I think they have it with the outside shot of making it into the top four, but they still need a couple more weeks before I feel like they're going to be a serious contender where they're right in it with the Tottenham and the Newcastles.
Just wanted to note it's Crystal Palace and Wolves who they will face, and then Manchester United. So
yes.
That actually makes it a very, very interesting tie in 2 weeks' time. Man U, Liverpool, seeing where they both teams are at that point, and see what sort of result both need to get. So on that note, we're going to take one last break here, guys, and then we'll be back talking about sort of the relegation battle happening at the bottom. So stay with us. Welcome back to Hustle Footy, guys. We are going to finish off the podcast for today talking about the relegation battle. First game is Chelsea 0, Southampton 1. Is there a case, Mac, that Chelsea could be included in that relegation battle? Give us the stats.
Okay, well, they're only 11 points out of it right now, which seems like a large gap. But if they keep playing that they have been playing, who knows? You never know. It could be a lot of fun. And their next matchup is against Spurs, and if Spurs play well, we could have more pressure. I think it's more likely that Graham Potter gets fired, and they might just literally break contracts of players and let them leave before that comes into fruition. To be honest, but it's a fun idea to think about. But they did lose against Southampton, which is. I don't like I was mentioning earlier on the podcast. I don't know if there has been this much of a low for maybe a Chelsea fan in quite some time. I know that second year of Mourinho. The third year of Mourinho, the last time around, wasn't that great. I think they were in a similar points position, but at least they still have the hangover of being winners in the league. So I could understand maybe that might be the closest thing, but in the last 15, 20 years. This has definitely been as low as you can go in regards to Chelsea, because losing at Southampton, who are bottom of the league, struggle to score goals, struggle to keep clean sheets, you let them do both. It's disappointing that way, and really overall through this game, they didn't provide a whole lot going forward. So even though I took aspects from their midweek matchup against Dortmund, some positives. Seems like it all slipped through the cracks in this game, and overall, I guess for them, I know we're kind of tongue in cheek starting off the relegation battle with them as a team. I think overall, they're playing just as well as a relegation team at the moment, and it's quite concerning.
Yeah, and we talked about it. Chelsea losing to Dortmund midweek. Who was the best team to play with? Bottom of the team, Southampton at home, and you'd expect them to finally get a goal and have some resemblance of what they looked like before, I guess, when they were actually scoring goals in the league. But again, with the performance, granted, they did have more chances, couple of clearances off the goal line, not convincing enough overall, I think. And with Southampton, Ward Prowse, you're gonna obviously have a chance whenever he gets a free kick. And so, hey, props to them. I think, with their changes in management recently, this would have been the best result that they could have hoped for. Getting a win away at Chelsea, sort of, hopefully starting a movement of their own. They are, I believe, 3 points away from safety, given the standings that are crazy at the bottom right now. And so there is, I think, a chance for them to do it. I personally don't think they do have it within themselves so far. But what do you think, Mac?
I completely agree. I really do not. I think in some ways, to be able to compare and contrast it to some teams we're going to talk about in a bit, let's say like the Evertons or the Wolves, right? Southampton have the ability, just like them, to score very few goals, not really have much on a creative sense. The downside to them is that I don't have any belief or strength in their defensive sense. Even though individually some players can have good games, just like in this Chelsea game, there were a couple good performances from their back line. They're not consistent enough in that aspect to at least have something to kind of rest your hat on, or at least like, this is our game plan, this is how we can be successful, this is how we can get out of the bottom three. I think for me, again, they are the shoe-in to for sure be relegated. The question is, who are the other two? And there has been kind of a shuffling of three-pack there. For them, though, the most fascinating part for me, and when I'm watching them play right now, is which team does James Ward-Prowse fit in when they do get relegated and he gets sold? Because I think that's the most fascinating part of the conversation. He does not. There's no situation he's playing in the championship next year. There can't be. He has to be going to some other team. The question is with who and where, and that's the most fascinating part. I know a lot of people have lofty ideas of either him going to, let's say, like a Spurs or a top 16. I don't know if he's there, but it could be interesting. Let's say if Brighton were to sell McAllister and he goes to Brighton, something like that. I think that would be a little bit more fun in and around those realms, like maybe an upper mid-tier club team in the league. I think he could be a good fit on some of those teams, or maybe even like a Brentford, and he's the one doing all those long balls, right? So again, overall, not even though this performance gives me so much more about Chelsea than gives me any faith in Southampton. So yeah, that's really how I feel.
Very interesting. I can just imagine James Ward-Prowse knocking balls into Ivan Toney and Mbuemo to chase. That would be a very nice sight to see. But again, we'll see what happens. Like you said, Bournemouth, Everton getting huge wins against relegation opponents, Wolves and Leeds. There has been a change a little bit in sort of that bottom three. Everton and Bournemouth getting themselves out, and Leeds and West Ham really dropping down further. Great performance, I think, for Everton. At home, I sort of had an inkling that they would have gotten at least a better performance than they did against Liverpool. That goal by Seamus Coleman, Mac, I know you mentioned it, and I did rewatch it just now. Hey, he must have meant it, right? He looked up, didn't see anyone, and it was like, hey, I'm going to try it. And props to him, he got it.
He absolutely meant it, because if you look at the way that he strikes the ball, no one crosses the ball like that with kind of the top of your foot. He's definitely going. And to be fair, though, throughout the entire game, this is in regards to, like I was saying earlier, is that offensively they have nothing in terms of their ability to be able to put balls into the back of the net. Dominic Calvert-Lewin and Neil Maupay have been two of the worst strikers in the Premier League thus far this season. I know Sims played up top I think he played behind Maupay today. In their most recent game, and he had a couple of decent moments in terms of connective play. But if you watch even Seamus Coleman when he's going in to be able to shoot that shot, there's nobody in the 18-yard box. There's nobody within 5 yards of the 18-yard box. So it seems like
Right.
no, they don't really have that goal scorer, that striker to be able to kind of put those goals away. Defensively, they can be sound, they can be solid, but if they had a decent number 9, I know it's weird, and I know that it feels very unusual. But if Sean Dyche was able to sign Chris Wood instead of Chris Wood going to Nottingham Forest, I would feel much more confident, because at least he'll be a big body in the box with kind of, back to those Burnley days of McNeil crossing in to Wood, because again, a couple times McNeil on the left hand side was putting delicious balls into the box and no one was there to kind of feast on it. So overall, this game greatly positive for Everton, but their main reason why they are where they are, I don't feel any more confident about. So at the very least, I feel confident that they could play well defensively, but going forward, there's just too many questions. And they might be able to edge out staying in this top division, but to do so, I feel like they'll need to be able to figure out some way to put balls into the back of the net. And I don't know right now if either of their main starting strikers that they've used thus far this season could do it.
Yeah. Again, great shout there. Chris Wood would be the perfect signing for a Shandyche team in the Premier League. I think they will just have enough, just because of the teams that are in the relegation zone right now. Leeds getting that loss obviously drops them down, and really inflicts more pressure on what they do in terms of. I think at the time of recording, I'm not sure if have they announced a who will take over for Leeds.
Not that I'm aware of. It's still an interim tag, if I remember correctly.
There's still questions there. This loss further makes it harder for themselves to get out. Going forward, you'd expect them to be able to score against this Everton team, who defensively can be decent, but against what we saw with Liverpool, weren't that at all. Weren't able to score, weren't able to keep a clean sheet. One thing I did like to see with the relegation battle is there was a little bit of a scrap between the Everton and Leeds players in that game. Always love to see that, just to add on to the drama that they have down there. But because of themselves, and even though Bournemouth got the win, I still think Bournemouth are one of the teams to be relegated this season. I think Everton might just have enough. But what do you think about that? Bournemouth win away at Wolves, Mac. Sounds like it could have gone either way. Tavernier got the goal, importantly, for Bournemouth to maybe give themselves some more time. But what do you see going forward for Bournemouth and even West Ham, who, with that loss, have dropped down to 18th place?
With West Ham, they've only won one game since October 30th, so they've been on a horrendous run of form in the Premier League. I don't know why. I know why. They have a lot of quality players. They have a great manager. It's just they can't seem to be able to get things going at the moment. I feel like they do have the fixtures coming up where they could be in a position to pick up some wins. They face Nottingham Forest next. I think they're at home as well, so I think that should be a fair result for them to be able to pick up 3 points. So overall, I'm going to be able to stick with West Ham. I feel very confident in it. Bournemouth, again, I'm going to stick back to kind of my prediction before. I think Bournemouth would be the team that drops out. They have the unfortunate position to face Manchester City after they had lost points. So what's going to guarantee I'll put an L across the board for them there. As well as, again, whenever they do pick up a win like this, it's very kind of smash and grab, where they're just fortunate to be able to pick up a win, where I don't feel a consistent threat in terms of how they're going to be able to be creative. And be able to score enough goals to be able to stay in the league as well. And defensively, they're just as poor as some of the teams below them. So there's still so many more questions for them. I feel like they are probably another shoe-in for me to be able to get relegated. But Everton, I feel like, just as we talked about, has something to rest their hat on, has a great manager that knows this league, knows Premier League football, and knows ways to be successful. In the 3 matches he's managed thus far, they've only conceded 2 goals. So they know something that they can be very successful in. So I'm quite more confident with Everton than the rest of the teams to be able to stay up. Of course, other than West Ham.
Yeah, again, West Ham, something that's surprising us all around the league, I think. But again, with the games that they have coming up, we expect them to hopefully pick up a couple points there and move themselves out. and it'll be a fascinating rest of the season for the teams down the bottom there. But I guess for now, that's all we can talk about. Let's see what happens in sort of the next run of games for the match day 25, which means we're going to conclude the podcast here for today. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe to us on our social medias. That's at house_of_footy. If you have any comments, suggestions, or general banter, feel free to get in touch with us via email as well. houseoffooty@hotmail.com is our email. The next time you hear from us will be Friday when we preview the EFL Cup final and match week 25 of the Premier League games. On that note, Mac, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you guys for listening.